Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, thank you for joining me once again for another episode of Felony Friday, right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. If you're new to Lions of Liberty, if this is your first time tuning in, this is our Friday show. We also have a Monday and a Wednesday show. Our Monday show is hosted by Marc, Clair, and our Wednesday show, Electric Liberty Land, is hosted by Brian McWilliams. And lucky you, actually, on this episode of Felony Friday, I'm going to be joined by both of those two gentlemen. That's right. This is the first episode of Felony Friday with two guests, the first roundtable. And this will be a little bit of a special roundtable. This will be a Is It a Crime roundtable. If you're familiar with the game show that we play from time to time here on Felony Friday, Is It a Crime and Should They Do Time? We'll be looking at probably 3 or 4 different news stories. And as we work through them, we'll be asking if they should or should not be a crime. You can find and read about all those news stories yourself. You can follow along and play at home at lionsofliberty.com/FF63 because this is episode 63. That's lionsofliberty.com/FF63. Just one more note, and then I will introduce Marc and Brian here. Be sure to check out lionsofliberty.com/support for all the ways that you can support the Lions of Liberty podcast. Now, we've released already to people who are members of our Lions Pride, who are supporters, who have either contributed $5, $10, or even $25. We've released a blooper reel. We're going to be releasing our conspiracy theory roundtable coming up here this weekend. And we're also going to have this episode of Felony Friday. There's going to be a second part that's going to be released later on. It'll just be released to our Lions Pride members, which will have a couple, 2 or 3. We'll grade them and ask, is this a crime and should they do time? So a little bonus feature for Felony Friday. So without further ado, I will bring on, I guess we'll go first to Marc. Marc Clair, welcome back to Felony Friday.
It's a pleasure to be here once again and to make some judgments about all the crimes, or are they, going on in the world. I'm excited.
You're always good at making judgments, right?
I'm a big judger.
Strong suit.
I'm very judgy.
Very judgy guy.
No, I always hate it. It actually brings up a pet peeve of mine. I really hate when people chide others for being judgmental or for judging. I'm like, that's literally everything we do is like based on some kind of judgment or ethical judgment we've made about the right and wrong actions in society. That's literally what we're going to do here today, is try to judge right versus wrong. And I think that's one of the most essential things human beings can do, is judge the actions of each other. It doesn't mean we should, browbeat people if they're just, if it doesn't mean like, judgment in the way that if someone is, say, prostituting themselves or selling drugs, we should physically beat them, but we can still judge their actions, even not as libertarians. You can judge everybody's actions. I think it's an essential human act, and I hate when people chide people for it.
Yeah, it's like people who say you shouldn't discriminate. Discriminating is an essential part of life. You got to discriminate. For example, I just discriminated just now when I introduced you first before Brian. So now I'll bring Brian in.
What the hell?
Talk.
What is this crap? I'm thinking that, like, how are you guys going to ramble on before you bring in the real talent on this 3-man panel?
I was hoping 25, 30 minutes, at least.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, you can call me, I am the Judge Reinhold of Liberty. I don't judge. I just am name judged.
All right. I don't know who that is. Judge Reinhold? Who is that?
Who that is.
Jesus, God, every time I'm on this show, Odie, you express some unbelievable ignorance when it comes to any sort of pop culture.
Sounds very familiar. It sounds
Have
like
you ever
I should
seen
know
Beverly
who Judge
Hills
Reinhold
Cop?
is.
Have you seen Beverly Hills Cop?
I think I might be a little bit below the age range there. You guys are a couple years older. Maybe I missed that.
Much. They made 3 of them. If you weren't for the first one, you should have been caught up in the second or the third. Anyway.
Balky Bartakamoose was in it, for Pete's sake.
Yeah, God, I can't believe you. Anyway, Judge Reinhold is a movie and TV actor. Very, very funny guy. Talks with a nasally voice. It doesn't matter. It's worthless on you. Anyway, good to be on the show again, except for these snafus where you know nothing about film, TV, celebrities, or pop culture.
Well, that keeps it interesting. You bring up this stuff, and probably half the audience doesn't know what you're talking about, so I'm just making them feel better.
We should put a poll, which you can find on our Facebook forum at Facebook, type in Lions Liberty Forum. But we should put a poll up and see just how many people know what I'm talking about.
Do you know who Judge Reinhold is? Yes or no?
That's the next forum topic.
Is you're talking about Judge Reinhold? Is that the guy from Fast Times at Ridgemont High?
Yes.
Okay, I know who he is.
Jerking off to Phoebe Cates when she comes out of the pool.
I know who that is. All right, just took a minute to register.
Hey, that could be our first. Is it a crime? Is Judge Reinhold masturbating to Phoebe Cates in Fast Times at Ridgemont High? Is that a crime? Is that a violation of her privacy being watched?
She's in public. He's on his own.
No, it's not public. It's a private home.
Yeah, but he lives. That's his home.
I know.
Somebody comes in to buy.
Wait a minute. I think I might have disagreed. So, but I mean, that's essentially the same thing as putting a camera in somebody's room without them knowing and videotaping them, and then masturbating to that.
She's not in her room. She was coming out of a pool.
Yeah,
that's true.
And she's not naked. I mean, she's just hot.
Yeah. And that's your house, you can spank it all you want. I mean, if somebody's sitting in your living room enjoying a cocktail and you want to go in the other room and peer out at them lecherously and jerk off,
she might be creeped out by it, but
remind me not to invite you over to my house.
Oh, come on, you're not attractive enough for me to do that.
Headline: Libertarian supports masturbating at all times to your guests, to your house guests. God, what have we done with this show already?
So we'll just know that I did it, Odie, until you stepped in a puddle of something cold later that evening.
Oh boy! So we'll just seamlessly transition from that into our first story. We're going to be talking about a story. Actually, I was hoping to bring on the people, the group of contributors who put this story together, did the research at the Marshall Project, but it fell through, unfortunately, but we're still going to talk about it anyway. And this should be very near and dear to you guys out in California because it took place there. And it's a research article, an investigative piece put together by the Marshall Project called Afraid of Jail, Buy an Upgrade. And essentially what it is, there's 26 cities in Los Angeles and Orange County, those two counties in California, where they're allowing defendants, they're giving them the option, if they don't want to stay in a county jail, they're able to stay in a city jail if they pay a little more money out of pocket. Between the years 2011 and 2015, the average cost of a stay that they paid, this is the whole cost of the duration from 1 day to I think the longest was, I don't know, several months. Average cost $1,756. The most expensive stay, this was by a man who actually paid to stay in one of these little city jails. He was responsible for, in a drunk driving freeway crash, he killed one of his passengers, and he paid $72,000 to stay out of the actual county jails. Now, of these more than 3,500 people who have stayed in these, who have done this California pay to stay program, there have been more than 160 participants who have been convicted of pretty serious crimes, going from assault to robbery, domestic violence, battery, sexual assault, sexual abuse of children, possession of child pornography. So this isn't just minor stuff that these people are getting a ticket out of the real prison system, to put quotes around that, because they're getting basically a country club type stay. A lot of times they can bring in their own food, they can wear their own clothes, they can just kind of hang out. Sure, they're still in jail, they can't leave, but it's a lot easier. They're not afraid of getting raped in the shower, for one thing, which I'm sure is nice little perk there.
Unless you can pay for that, in which case.
Yeah, unless you want to pay for that, you got to bring in your own person though to rape you.
Yeah, of course.
So just off the bat right here, guys, and we'll start with Brian. See, I'm being democratic here, or I guess that's not the right word, but I started with Marc first, and I'm going with Brian.
It's all about equality, isn't it?
There you go. I'm an egalitarian. So actually, I'm not. Let's start with Brian. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's funny because I'm torn between saying, oh, well, you know what, this is kind of an interesting take on the free market when it comes to prisons. Although I have to say, overall, I find it pretty atrocious, because if there's one thing universally that should apply, look, if government exists and if prisons exist and if laws exist, they need to be applied equally, despite what money or influence you're supposed to have. I mean, look, we're looking at Hillary Clinton not getting put into prison for God knows what she did with all of her email scandals and all of this Clinton Foundation cash because of her connections, because of her money. So on a simpler level, when you look at these people that have committed some horrible crimes, being able to buy their way out of the prison that we all should fear, what's the point of laws then? Because if your crime is not applicable under those same laws as everyone else, it defeats the purpose of even having laws or having prisons.
What do you think, Mark? Is this ethical? And is this something you guys being from California, had you heard of this before? You familiar with it?
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I'd never.
No, I'm shocked, appalled, and I'm going to have a special savings account just for this.
Well, my initial reaction was, kind of probably the same as you guys, being pretty appalled by it. And just jumping to the idea of a tiered justice system, and some people not seeing, getting the same sort of justice that maybe someone without the same means might get. And I do still have that criticism, but the more I read the article and the more I think about it, and I'm not saying I totally have abandoned that position, because I still do have that feeling when I think about this. First of all, we already have a tiered jail system. There's already... there's jails that are for the really bad people that suck bad, where you can hardly even get out of your cell, and there's jails that where they send more white collar criminals, and there's a whole tiering system already. So
which one did Rico end up in?
I think the least bad one.
His final spot. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's already a tiered system. So, I mean, I can't just be mad at the tiered system and not be as equally angry at the currently tiered system. But, I mean, the tiers are sort of based on the severity of the crime. And it does seem to me, I'm not saying I'm in favor of this, by the way. I just want to state that right now. I do have major problems with this. But at the same time, there's one quote that actually stood out to me from this pastor who was convicted of statutory rape. But he said, what I don't agree with is people saying that's not enough punishment. And he said, what's the concept of punishment? Is it the time or getting beat up every other day in jail? And it's not a terrible point, because all the criticisms that I have sort of seen sprinkled in throughout this article are, well, these guys aren't having a shitty enough time, and basically implying, and one of the quotes in the article said, well, yeah, that's part of jail. That's why it sucks. You might get beat up. You might get raped. Mm-hmm. And while I don't like to see tiered justice, I don't necessarily think that the problem is that people aren't having a shitty enough time in prison. I don't think that, I actually started to think by the time I was done reading this, that maybe the problem isn't that some people can do this, it's that not enough people can. It's that not enough people have these opportunities. I mean, maybe living in this type of safer, quote, jail is something that could be kind of worked into the current prison system and maybe used as a reward. Maybe it's not just you have the money, maybe it's also once you're in the system, like Michael Santos lays out, it's all about how you behave and how you act in prison. Maybe they can incorporate something like this. If you can earn money at a job in prison, I also think part of this is change the work laws so that whatever laws apply to regular human beings, I'm against the minimum wage, so I want no minimum wage anywhere. But if there's a minimum wage outside prison, I think it should apply in prison as well. I don't think corporations should have an advantage to basically use prisoners as slave labor. So even that out. Let prisoners work, but they shouldn't have different laws applied to them when accepting work. So if you allow prisoners to actually make like some closer to market rates, and you let them kind of buy into better jails if they also behave better and maybe serve as leaders in the jail, like I actually think this could maybe be the beginning of a good thing if we figure out a more just way to sort of see it through. I don't think that, like, my problems with the justice system are not that people aren't getting raped and beat up enough, and that seemed to be the biggest criticism that I saw sprinkled throughout that article. And the more I seemed that, the more that the attitude just started to seem a little bit sick to me, that people don't think that people are having a bad enough time in prison, and that's just what I started to think by the end of the article. I can't really say I'm completely for or completely against this now, but it did really get me thinking about things on a few different levels.
In that rambling rant there, which was prolific, I really enjoyed it. I think you might have just solved the problem with the prison system in this country. I had not.
That's good to know. I didn't know it would be so easy. I just solved it.
I had not thought of that at all. So I did think of the fact that, I mean, their major criticism, like you said, is they keep pointing out they're missing out on like the violence and the horribleness of prison. And I thought, well, and I've brought this up before when I've interviewed people about solitary confinement. Prison doesn't need to be that horrible. That's not actually helping anybody. It's not helping reform anybody, not helping anybody to, once they do get out, for them to more easily reintegrate into society. So, I think that's really great.
Sorry to interrupt you, but like
go ahead.
On that same thread, one of the victims even mentioned, she didn't feel like she got anything back from the punishment because of the circumstances that the person served the time. I think this is the person who had sex with that like hip hop mogul. I think that
was the one that he had forced a blowjob. Is what he
I mean, I didn't see anything about the force thing, but it was the underage person that kind of that basically I think expressed that they felt like they didn't get payback from the time that he served, or this is the guy that was like traveling to Europe between stints. I mean, I think that was obviously a little more favoritism than almost anybody could get. So I mean, I think something like that should be looked at. But I mean, again, it goes back to like what would she have gotten if he served worse time? What would she have gotten if he was in jail every day getting beat up? Like she doesn't get anything for that either. So maybe we need to focus jail and prison more on literally paying a victim. If you determine someone is the victim of a crime, maybe you figure out a way to actually put them. I know we have civil courts, but this should be part of our regular criminal system. Put a monetary value on that. Let them work that off. Maybe if they're earning money in prison, they then have a choice. I can pay for the higher tiered prison and be in a nicer environment, or I can get out of here earlier if I don't do that and I put more money to paying back the person that I committed the crime against. So now they have a decision to make, and now it's not necessarily about your circumstance coming in. And maybe you have to start from zero. Maybe you start from zero when you go into jail. You don't have an advantage if you're rich going in compared to a poor guy. But it did seem a lot from the examples in the article too that it did seem that a lot of it was judgment of the judge. I'm not saying the judges were making correct judgment.
Yeah, the judge has to permit you to go and do the specific.
Right. And it seemed like most of these cases, at least in the judge's view, I'm not saying they were right, they saw circumstances to the point where this person wasn't going to be a danger and wasn't going to be a flight risk or anything. And they made their judgment but based on the circumstances of the crime, this person was a safe person to allow into the system. Again, I don't know if it's necessarily fair. I can totally understand why people on the other side who maybe didn't get this offer would be like, what the fuck? How come I'm sitting here in shitty jail and this guy gets to go to, the nicer jail? But I don't think the solution is make sure jail's shitty for everybody.
I agree with you.
I was going to let, before I spoke, I was going to let Odie, do you want to finish your earlier thought, Odie? I can't remember what it was, but
neither can I. But
all right.
It was probably along the line something what Marc said there. I think what I was alluding to is I do like the idea of having this tiered system, and I think it's a good idea, like Marc said. Maybe people do start at the bottom. You can't have favoritism just based on your standing, based on how much money you have going into it. The crime is the crime. You can't let that be clouded by outside factors. So people should start on that level playing field. But I don't think there's anything wrong with being able to, if you are a good prisoner, and if you actually, progressing and working your way through prison, not starting fights, then you should be able to work your way out and pay your way out. And if you want to apply that money to maybe getting out sooner by paying the victim, in an ideal world, of course, it would only be crimes with victims. People who committed victimless crimes like, drug trafficking or whatnot would never be in prison. But in our current system, sure, there are people in prison on victimless crimes. So yeah, allow them to work their way out and either get out sooner or pay off, if they do have a victim, pay off their victim. And either move to a system where they're going to these nice city jails and not in these terrible places, the county jails, and go from there. Any last thoughts on that, Brian?
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually do think it's an interesting concept as far as the merit-based system is, we're earning your way up to a better prison. I'm all for that. I think it's a good idea. And in fact, when you think about it this way, look, these people, he's not getting raped enough in prison. I mean, look, nobody should be getting raped in prison. You're not there. Right. Part of your sentence is not being raped or shanked in the shower. You're just supposed to spend your time there and be denied certain liberties while you are incarcerated. So, I mean, like we're talking about nonviolent felons, the people who are getting raped in prison, by the way, other than child molesters who do get raped and murdered, or at least murdered, but the people that are nonviolent felons are the ones, by the way, being raped. The murderers are the ones doing the raping. So it's not like the worst people are getting the worst treatment in these prisons anyway. Let's just keep that in mind. But yeah, so if you have a merit-based system where you can move up and go to these nicer places based upon how you act or the way, you can advance, and then they have perks. You could have more education. You could have more items available on the outside. So I think it's great if we did something like that. But like you guys were saying, and like I said earlier, you cannot say that on equal playing field, okay, well, we all are equal under the law, except this guy who's got $100,000 more and he's got a connection to the judge. And I also think it's ridiculous that the judge arbitrarily can decide who goes and who does not go, especially when we see some of the charges against these people. So overall, as it stands right now, I'm 100% against this practice. But if they would only listen to the Lions of Liberty podcast, I think we've come up with a very good solution.
Yeah. Judges have way too much power. Definitely agree with you there. And I had a feeling that...
Well, how come the jury can decide, like, if you're guilty or not, but then they're just like, all right, you guys can go home. We're going to let this one guy figure it out from here. you know?
Yeah.
He's got the fancy, the fancy coat on. He's sitting up high. He's got a gavel, so obviously he knows what he's doing.
Obviously.
So let's move on. I did have a feeling that first topic might take up the majority of the time, so I think we're only going to have time now on today's show to talk about 2 Is This a Crime examples, and that means that probably these last 3 we're going to have to move them into the Lions Pride exclusive content. So let's get through these, talking about this first one here, and this has to do with the title. The title of this one: a 20-year-old man deported for sex with a 16-year-old girl, which, of course, that's not even illegal in 43 states. So to set the stage here, this actually occurred back in 2009. The man here at the time was 20 years old. Juan Quintana had a girlfriend at the time he was 16. They had sex before they were in California, and because California has one of the highest ages of consent in America at 18 years old, and because he was more than 3 years older than his girlfriend at the time, this was considered a crime. So he served his time for that crime. He went to jail for 90 days. That was in 2009, and then he was allowed to go on with his life, and he moved up to be closer to family. He moved to Michigan, and then when he went to Michigan, the feds began some deportation proceedings, and they sent him back to Mexico in 2013. That's right. Barack Obama, the guy who apparently, was not deporting people, even though he deported 2.5 million people, deported this guy back to Mexico for a crime that he served his time for, which we'll judge if it was even a crime or not. So I guess the reason here quickly that the feds gave for sending him back to Mexico was, because he was a lawful permanent resident. He came here with his family at the age of 12. But the reason they said that he'd been convicted of a sexual abuse of a minor, so he had to go. So I guess Obama, that was the edict. They were getting rid of any any illegal immigrant who had been convicted of sexual abuse of a minor. So on this case, guys, I guess it's kind of a two-part thing. On the first part, the 20-year-old and the 16-year-old, is that a crime? Is that a crime for sexual relations between a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old? I know it's probably a nuanced answer, maybe. Let's start with Marc.
Well, we've talked about this before. I actually discussed this with the person who wrote this article, Lenore Skenazy. She was a guest on the show back in the day, back last year. So maybe you can link to that in your old show notes there. Yeah, the issue of consent when it comes to age is a tricky one at times. But I do think our laws are largely arbitrary, and that's the problem. Look, if there's an 8-year-old and a 25-year-old, it's pretty clear the 25-year-old to me is committing a crime. But if there's a 16-year-old and a 20-year-old, some people might say the 20-year-old is taking advantage of the 16-year-old. I don't think that's necessarily a wrong judgment, but it's probably more situational at that point. There probably are 16-year-olds who are very mature and understand exactly what they're doing. There are probably 16-year-olds who don't. So this is kind of a case where the law gets tricky. But to me, when things are tricky, you err on the side of not throwing people in jail, not making people felons. And it does appear that there was consent from everyone involved here, and no coercion, no abuse, no physical violence. So I would disagree with the initial crime. And of course, if I disagree with the initial crime, I disagree with the deportation, not even getting into the whole open borders, closed boarding, what our immigration policy should be. I'm just saying, even under our current system, I don't agree with this going down the way it did.
I will agree with that. I think that, 20-year-old, 16-year-old, should it be illegal if they're both consenting? No. Should a 20-year-old be dating a 16-year-old? I don't necessarily think so. I think that guy's kind of pathetic, but hey, I still think it should be illegal. I don't know the circumstances. And like Marc said, there's different people are more mature at different ages. I also didn't realize that California I didn't realize 18 was the age of consent in California, which is insanely high. That's crazy. But that being said, should he have been deported? Absolutely not. Should this have been a crime? Absolutely not. And especially because, they have this guy, he does his time or whatever, and then they wait 3 years and then deport him. It's kind of like a double whammy for this dude. So while I do think he is slightly pathetic for dating a 16-year-old when he's 20, I just dropped my phone on the floor. My phone that I just got back. No, I do not.
What happened to your old phone, Brian? Real quick.
I dropped it down the hole in the ice in Minnesota when I was ice fishing. It really fucking sucked.
Which I'm sure happens to like half the people who ice fish, probably.
Yeah, I went. Well, somebody did it earlier that day, and I did it 5 minutes later because it just, you're in these puffy clothes. You go to get your phone out, and you're drinking all day, and it hits you in the hand. And it took like one, you like hit once and was down the hole, and I was just like, well, see you later. And I went to Best Buy, and I've asked them because I tried to get a phone, which I couldn't because the town was too small. They didn't have a Sprint store, so I go to the Best Buy though, and the guy he was like. I was like, yeah, does this happen a lot? He's like, oh, yeah. He's like, I just did it last month. Straight down the hole. But by the way, I'll give a shout out to my family who's out there. Despite the fact that it really stressed me out losing my phone, they all are listeners to the Lions of Liberty podcast. So shout out to Donnie, my stepfather-in-law. Thanks for listening, Donnie.
Fantastic. Good to have you here. One last question I want to ask you guys on this topic. So talking about the age of consent, it's nuanced. Does it make sense in the United States to leave this up to the state? Should that be determined at the state level, or should stuff like this should it be a nationwide, a federal age of consent?
Well, that's the problem here, isn't it? Isn't the problem that this happened at the state level? But then the feds are what took it to a deportation, but they used that state law. This is a tough one because I don't think that. I don't think the state should probably be I don't think the state level should even be setting these laws, but I also don't think the federal level should be setting these laws either. I really don't know how this age can be determined, but I don't.
I would say 13 and under illegal. Anything past that, I'd say you have a jury decide. If somebody brings charges, if a parent or the person or one of the people involved wants to bring charges, then they can bring charges and the police can handle that and they can have a trial and they can decide whether or not the people are mature enough, if they knew they were doing, if they're consensual. I think that's the best way to handle it because otherwise it's arbitrary.
You need to work in things at that point, like were the parents involved? Are the parents consenting?
Right.
Was there manipulation involved? So sometimes the guys lied to. I mean, the guy that the hip hop guy from that was in that article about the 2-tiered jail system. I'm not saying he's telling the truth. He might be full of it, but I'm just as an example. He said he thought the girl was obviously probably 18 because she worked at the place, and he just assumed.
Look,
so
I met a girl in a bar that you just have to be 21 to get into a bar. I met a girl who was at a bar, and thank God didn't do anything with her, but she was 17. And if you're in a bar, you presume that person's 21.
If you're in California, you'd be breaking the law, and you probably would receive no sympathy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, the one problem with leaving it up to the parents, saying, allow the parents to determine if it's less than that age, is I don't really like that because, parents could really, if they're allowing that in certain situations, that's considered child abuse, I think. So it's very tough, and it's something, I think it's an area where I don't think anyone has it right per se, so I don't think libertarians are behind.
Well, I don't think any parent should be able to allow some 18-year-old to have sex with their 10-year-old. There has to be. It's a very difficult situation. I don't think there's science that can say this is the age. It's 100% for everybody, consent or not. And it's one of the toughest issues, I think, especially as libertarians who try to look at everything through consent. We all agree a 4-year-old can't consent to these acts. We all agree a 25-year-old can. But somewhere in the middle of that, it gets really fuzzy.
Speaking of this, I don't know if you heard the last episode of the Johnny Rocket Launchpad, Marc, where you got a shout out on there where they were interviewing Robert Murphy. Did you hear that?
I did. Yes, I can't keep track of all the shout outs I get from Johnny Rocket, Dave Smith.
So many
shout outs.
I was in the middle of nowhere with no reception, so I'm behind on every podcast right now.
Yeah,
well, you have to.
We got to arrange karaoke with Johnny Rocket and Bob Murphy and that whole gang.
We definitely do. And I will link to that episode in the show notes. But the question they asked, and we're not going to talk about it here because we're running out of time. The question they asked, I guess, was if Marc Clair had wanted to have a child, a farm where he could abuse children, would that be allowed in a
it's because I gave them that question to ask. So that's for the record, that's why he thought of me, not for any other reason why I would have my own private, child sex farm.
You could call it Clair Care, and people could drop their children off to be molested.
I liked how they all giggled too when they asked.
You cannot find a Clair Care shirt at our store at lionsofliberty.store, but you can find some.
Not yet. Dan Smots, if you're listening.
Get to work.
Seamless plug there. Seamless plug. Speaking of seamless plugs, we got a couple of libertarian podcasts I want to tell you about. So listen to this now.
Hey guys, this is Roger Paxton, and if you're fed up with the government running every single aspect of your life, but you're not listening to the Lava Flow podcast yet, then what's wrong with you? Check us out at thelavaflow.com, or just go back to sucking up to the government. The Lava Flow podcast, striking the root every single episode.
This is Chris Spangle, and I am the host of We Are Libertarians, which you can find in iTunes, Google Play, or at wearelibertarians.com. We are a podcast that brings you all of the irreverence that modern politics deserves by examining current events from a libertarian perspective. So please, check us out at wearelibertarians.com.
Hey everyone, the Johnny Rocket Launchpad is Liberty. Each week we strive to bring you the best guests in talk radio. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad delivers weekly interviews of noteworthy politicians, experts, and activists. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad is bringing the party to the Libertarian Party and launching ideas in your direction. Check us out at johnnyrocketlaunchpad.com, and you can hear me, Kurt Nelson, and the beautiful Heather Nixon talk about the ideas of liberty, rock and roll.
And we're back here to talk about our last story of the day here on Felony Friday. We're going to be talking about a teen who was charged with lying about being raped by football players, and this happened at Sacred Heart University. The teen in this story, Nikki Jovino, 18 years old. She's been charged with second-degree falsely reporting an incident and tampering with or fabricating physical evidence, which is a felony. And like I said, this was in connection with an incident at Sacred Heart University. And what happened in this incident is this woman, Nikki Jovino, was at a party, and she accused two football players of pulling her into a bathroom and raping her. She made this accusation while she was in the hospital, and the cops came and they were doing a rape kit. She said to the cops that this occurred. When the police went and actually investigated it and talked to people at the party, they said they actually overheard her saying that she actually wanted to have sex with these two men, and people witnessed her walking into this bathroom willingly. So her story fell apart. There were holes in it, and that's where these charges came from. And unfortunately, these two football players, they're off the football team. I think one of them is now back in school. Sacred Heart has claimed that they did not suspend or kick out any of these players for these charges, which I don't know if that's true or not, but there's been nothing to the contrary. So thoughts on this, guys? Let's start with Brian. Falsely reporting a rape, is this a crime? And I think maybe more importantly, because I think I know the answer to the first one, should this person do time?
Answer the first one. This is definitely a crime. It's actually it's a truly horrible crime to accuse somebody, because we all know how society is set up. And despite what feminists might think or might say, there's still quite a bit of bias that goes against men, especially where things like this are concerned. I mean, this woman tried to ruin these two men's lives. And because you didn't mention this part, this is the story where she did it because she was trying to make another guy jealous, right? Or she was trying to not let him know that her former boyfriend. Is this the same story I'm thinking of?
Yeah, it's the same story. Well, I think what she said is she was trying.
Reason ever.
Well, the reason it makes sense, I think they got it wrong. The reason that they gave was that she was trying to make this other guy she liked feel bad for her. I think actually what happened was, she's at this party, she's drinking, having a good time, she's drunk, and she decides she wants to have sex with these two guys, has sex, regrets it, and then tries to figure a way out of it because she still likes this other guy. Right. That's probably what happened.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. So, what a horrible reason to ruin two lives, to potentially put people in jail for many, many years, to get their scholarships revoked, to get them kicked out of school. I mean, this girl is a horrible human being. So, yes, it is definitely a crime. Should she do time? Hell yes, she should do time. I wouldn't mind it if she did just as much time as they would have done. Because if she's literally taking away these people's liberty, if you're going to do that, if you're willing to do that, and you take steps to do that, and she wasn't going to recant, they found out that this was a lie, and then they addressed this chick with this news, and then she's like, oh yeah, whoops, piece of garbage. Yes, put her in prison. This kind of stuff cannot go on in society. It's absolutely disgusting.
These two guys are lucky because on a lot of campuses, if this was handled by just the university or the college, a lot of times they don't even bring in the police. The police are actually investigated and, found witnesses and asked questions. This had been just the university, panel looking at this. these two kids, their lives would be ruined. They'll be kicked out of school.
Penn State IFC looked into it. They'd be done.
Oh, dead.
Exactly.
Well, do you hear that story about, and sorry, Mark, you haven't given your take on this yet, but do you hear that story about the guy? He was a student on the football team who was in a consensual relationship, not just banging one time, with an athletic trainer. And some other woman in the building saw them leaving a closet and saw like a hickey on her neck or something, and told their supervising board that she thought that he had assaulted her, and they kicked him out of school. There's all these charges being pressed against him, and the woman's like, none of that happened. I wanted this. We're in a relationship, and they still refused. The administrator still said, no, we have our findings. We think this is what happened. So yeah, to your point, insanity.
Yeah, I'll link to that one. I'll link to that one in the show notes as well. That was an absolutely ridiculous story.
Yeah, Mark, and you're not gonna hear much disagreement from me here. I think it's absolutely heinous. And like I said, it's more than just the crime. It's more than just the fact that she essentially sicked a gang of thugs, the police, on this guy. I mean, I'm not trying to smear police, but I mean, if it wasn't the police system and it was just me telling someone, hey, these guys raped me, go get them, and they beat him up, well, I would be an accomplice in the beating up of that guy. And it's the same thing here, except they're taking the guys to jail and ruining their life and all that stuff. Especially because they could have, like you said, gone to jail for a long time. And even besides the jail, their reputations take the hit, and often the reputation. You'll meet people today that still think that the Duke lacrosse team raped somebody, even though that's completely been proven, debunked. We know that was a complete lie. People still think it because of those initial headlines. So a lot of these guys are going to carry the stigma with them the rest of their lives. And I'm not saying you own your reputation. There's a lot of libertarian arguments on that, but it's a factor. It's a factor to me in how heinous this act is. When it comes to the should she do time question, it gets a little more trickier because then we go back into this, what should the justice system be about? Like, I don't want her in prison getting raped. Like, doesn't make me feel better. Again, I think that the whole way we look at what justice is totally wrong. There should at least be maybe like a monetary value placed on the smearing that she did with them. And it should probably be pretty freaking high, probably to the point that she has to work for 20, 30 years to pay it off. I mean, this is serious crime, but I don't know if stuffing her in prison for 10 years helps anything either. She's obviously did something very bad, did something awful, and she should pay a price. I don't see how necessarily. I think she's. I don't know. I don't know if she's learned her lesson. I want to think she will have by now. She still is a young person. Young people do terrible, stupid things sometimes. I don't think that she should spend 20, 30 years in jail like these. I don't know how long people spend in jail for rape typically, but I'm not exactly sure what the punishment should be. But again, speaking on what I was talking about at the beginning of the show with the first story, I do think the punishment should be more in line with recompensating these two guys and paying them back in some way than just punishing her, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. She definitely needs to be punished. Maybe it could be like maybe punishments overall in the criminal justice system need to be more creative, like that Seinfeld episode where was it George?
So they'll send him to be my butler.
Yeah. Maybe she has to have threesomes with these guys like every couple of months now.
So maybe I don't know about that, but some sort of
maybe not that. Maybe not that, guys. Okay. Someone's going to clip that one piece of audio off, and next thing you know.
Visit Marc Clair at Marc Clair, where he's molesting children.
Hey, that's Clair. Wait a minute. This show is not reflecting well on me at all. We should probably wrap things up before
your name is getting a hit
before the FBI shows up the lines.
Well, you got to own your reputation.
That's true.
So that's it for the show, guys. We are going to have, as I said, of course, we'll be doing talking about three more stories in our Lions Pride group. There'll be exclusive content, and all the listeners out there can join that by going to lionsofliberty.com/support. If you guys haven't checked out our t-shirt line yet, if you haven't checked out the cool koozies we have, you can find that all at lionsofliberty.store. And yeah, that's really it. We're trying to grow this show. That's why we're pushing this stuff. Of course, you're still getting these 3 shows every week from Mark, Brian, and myself. You're still getting them every week for free from us, so we're still giving you that. We're not putting pressure on you. And if this is your first time listening to the show, don't think, these assholes are trying to take all my money. We're not trying to take your money. Well, we are trying to take some of your money, but we're trying to grow the show for the cause of liberty. So it's all good. We're not taking anything off the top here. We're just trying to grow the show and spread the message. So that's all I got for today. That's all I got for Felony Friday. Thank you all for listening. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.